Hello everyone, you can call me Freebie Wits, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Analyze and Adapt Season 2, where I see if a TV series would work in 3 different mediums. Tabletop as in board and card games, tabletop roleplay like Dungeons and Dragons, and finally as a Larp. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. These little things really do help the channel. Today we're taking a look at the Power Rangers, Super Sentai, or the Ginyu Force. Whatever their name is, they're color-coded warriors who team up to fight for good. Or Frieza in the case of the Ginyu Force. For those of you who don't know, Power Rangers was originally Super Sentai in Japan, a live-action show about a team of superheroes who kung fu and blast away evil in an explosion of color, hayas, and literal explosions. Seeing how popular the show was and how great it was for merchandising, some enterprising folks took Super Sentai, analyzed and adapted it for Western audiences, thus creating Power Rangers. And before we knew it, their popularity over here exploded just like another monster of the week. With every year, there's a new season, and with every new season, there's a new toy to sell. That said, while every season has their own gimmick, they usually share something in common with every other one. They all have the Red Ranger as the leader, they all have giant robots, and of course most of them come in teams of 5 for the most part. Now, I won't be focusing on any specific Power Rangers seasons, and instead I'll be trying to capture the spirit of the various shows so we can distill and adapt them into the various mediums that I usually adapt stuff into. So with that out of the way, let's start, as we always do, with Tabletop. Hiya! Before we start, I should point out that Power Rangers does indeed have at least one board game out there. But having never played it and only having seen screenshots, I'm coming from a place of ignorance when it comes to Power Rangers on the table. So keep that in mind when going forwards. From memory, for the most part, each Power Rangers episode has 3 sections to them. The first section, in my opinion, is the most boring part, the civilian part. It's where characters do character stuff and talk to each other, making sure they're, actual characters, fleshing that sort of thing out, their backstories and whatnot. Boring. At least when I was a kid. Still kind of feel it's boring, but maybe that just says more about me than anything else. The second part is coincidentally also the second best, the part where they get their suits on and start kicking everything in the face. The third and most amazing, kick-ass, badass, awesome, cool part is the giant robots! Look, I like giant robots, okay? It's a bias I have, and if you watch my videos and follow my channel, it's just a fact about me that you have to accept, okay? I'm never going to apologize for it. Giant robots are my thing, and if it weren't for the fact that it's hard to move around in such blocky armor, I'd LARP as a mech the first chance I got. Anyways, this isn't about LARP, we're here to adapt Power Rangers to tabletop. As I mentioned before, the show can be split up into 3 different sections, and in that regard, we could in theory have the board game incorporate all 3 into the game, with each section acting like a phase of sorts. If this was a pure card game, we could call each round of a play an episode. The most boring civilian phase could involve drawing cards, while the suiting up phase could be combat, while the giant robot part could be more combat. Not sure how that would work, to be honest. For a board game, we could just have the civilian part of the board be a small part of the game, with little objectives that modify future combat. Things like the characters having indigestion, self-doubt, or being late for a charity ball. Then when combat comes in, the players could have less ranges to begin with until they all turn up, or have them come in with different buffs or debuffs depending on the outcome of the civilian phase of the game. The giant robot, of course, is the climax where everyone just beats the living hell out of each other while stomping around the city. Now, to simplify things, we could always just focus on one of the phases and make a singular game around that. In that regard, the civilian phase is right out. No one wants to play a Power Rangers game if there aren't actually any Power Rangers in it. It's like having a Captain America show without Captain America. Though I guess that turned out pretty good, so what do I know? Either way, having a team-based strategy game where 5 Rangers beat up some monsters isn't out of the realms of possibility. While there are a lot of tabletop war games out there that require vast hordes of plastic and paint, there are games there that focus on smaller engagements. Things like War Machine, Mordheim, and Star Wars X-Wing allow players to have a handful of models before getting into the action. For the giant robot part, we could always just copy King of Tokyo. Is that a cop-out? Well, yeah, but it's my channel, so I get to say what I want. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's move on to tabletop roleplay. Say-ya! Go, go, Power Rangers! Most Power Ranger seasons involve 5 individuals working together to eventually take on a big, bad, evil guy, girl, or thing depending on the season. As far as tabletop RPGs go, it's a pretty easy ride to analyze and adapt. The red one is the leader, pink is usually the girl, blue is the second in command, yellow is weird, and black is strong. Now, this isn't a hard rule except for the red being in charge, and outside the comic, I don't think there's ever been a pink ranger that isn't a girl. I'm fairly sure that male characters have turned pink before, at least used Pink Ranger's power, but I don't ever recall a ranger who is specifically pink being male. Regardless, the other colors can be a toss-up. Oh, and the 6th Ranger is always overpowered and most likely to be the DM PC. In that regard, I find it very hard to recommend Power Rangers as an acceptable game to convert into a tabletop RPG. Even if they're going to be directly controlled by another player, by definition, the 6th Ranger is always mechanically the most powerful of the bunch. Imagine having a level 10 wizard in a party of level 6 fighters. It just doesn't work. In D&D at least, the wizard of equivalent level has the excuse of having less hit points than anyone else, but the White Ranger, when compared to everyone else, has no mechanical weaknesses except perhaps one. For some reason, most 6th Rangers are evil through mind control, and if they're not evil, then it's because they're far away and only turn up when things get bad enough. Or maybe they're evil because they're being manipulated. Whatever the case, they usually start out as, well, the bad guy, or being stuck in a block of ice. Regardless of the reason, having a character that can go bad in the middle of a session warps the game. It's like having a Mary Sue in that everybody and everything has to focus on them due to their power and or potential for damage. I'm not saying including a 6th Ranger is impossible, only that there are many pitfalls to introducing one. A character that acts as a 6th Ranger in other D&D games or tabletop RPGs is a sign of a bad game or a DM who doesn't know what to do, who wants to be in the limelight. It's not always the case, but it usually is. Now, while it's too profitable to exclude its 6th Ranger in the Power Rangers show due to merchandising opportunities, we as players can choose to do it ourselves. I've personally run a Power Rangers style game before, using playing cards instead of dice to determine the outcome. The game was made by me, from scratch with the help of friends, on and off over a period of years. One of the playtests was a campy one-shot Power Rangers game, and overall I think it worked. Now, mind you, they didn't play as Power Rangers specifically, but as the actors who played the civilians who then became the Power Rangers. It was pretty fun. If you want to join in and give it a go, then please find the link below in the pinned comment. And yes, the idea of actors playing the superheroes and whatnot was heavily inspired by Chroma Squad, the game that I'm playing on screen right now. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's move on to Larp. I feel like a broken record sometimes, and what I'm about to say is going to sound very familiar to those of you who watch my previous Analyze and Adapt videos. Punching and kicking doesn't work in LARPs. It just doesn't. Besides the very real risk of injury, we're just not trained properly like actual martial artists to take a hit or fall properly. Now that said, there's nothing stopping us from actually learning proper Kung Fu and doing a LARP that does the punching and kicking of Power Rangers justice, but I'm lazy, so instead of that, I'm just going to point out that Power Rangers isn't just about kicking and punching, but also swords, axes, bows, tridents, and sais. Also guns, that they don't call guns, but instead blasters, which, oddly enough, matches with how a lot of LARPs refer to their guns now that I think about it. So, with weaponry more or less sorted, let's move on to the next issue in Power Rangers. Helmets. Looking and fighting in a helmet can be hard as it can cut off your peripheral vision. Now, some of the helmets in Power Rangers are fine, but others look to have very little to no vision at all. As any HEMA practitioner will tell you, historically speaking, this isn't a new issue, and helmets back then were more designed to save your noggin than to give you great line of sight. So to that degree, it's not that big of an issue. It's still an issue, mind you, but with time, it becomes less of one, especially with training. Speaking from personal experience, I'd rather just go without the helmet and avoid all the potential injuries in the first place. Seriously, the first time I wore my helmet to LARP, I tripped over my own foot. To be clear, this isn't a criticism of helmets and LARP, it's criticism of my own stupid personal clumsiness. These days, I only wear the helmet if I am not planning to fight or for photo opportunities. Anyways, the Rangers are sorted, which lets us move on to the monsters/bosses. Every week there's a new monster to fight in Power Rangers, and while that's all well and good when you have a costuming department with an actual costuming budget, things become a little more difficult when it's LARP. Now, don't get me wrong, getting a LARP kit and fighting as a monster is all well and good, but doing it once a week with a new monster? Not very easy. Or at the very least, not very cheap. Seriously, a good-looking monster costume that's durable and easy enough to move around in for a LARP can be very costly, and having to only use it once means it's very difficult to justify the price for. For context, my own LARP kit, which is now pictured above, is about 900 or 1000 Australian dollars, and I only consider it worth it because I spent years using the thing, not just for LARPs, but also for costume parties and free dress days at work. The people playing the monsters would have to be very rich or very creative on how they make their new stuff. It's not economically practical otherwise. So Power Rangers as a LARP, while possible, is just plain expensive, at least as the bad guy. Seems that crime just doesn't pay. Then we have the mecha aspects of the game. Remember when I said I'd play as a mech if it weren't for how blocky the costume was? Well, there's a lot of mecha type costumes out there. I haven't seen any mech specific LARPs out there, but I'm sure they exist. Now, if we were all just playing mechs, that'd be fine, but if you played 5 people getting into a singular mech, that gives an issue that I covered before in the Steven Universe video. It's the idea of what do you do with the other 4 people if only one person gets to be the mech? Do we have all 5 people just hug each other and pretend to be one giant robot? Do we have someone piggyback each other? Or do we have the other 4 on the sidelines telling the one guy what to do, assuming that they all get to control an arm and a leg or something else? Actually, now that I say it out loud, that actually kind of sounds fun. A bunch of people yelling at a single mech player what to do. Would it be chaotic? Hell yes, but I kind of find that's part of the fun. As an added bonus, the monster of the week could stay as the same costume because they don't actually literally grow, they just stay the same size. Oh, and if we wanted destructible environments like cities, we could just have cardboard boxes. That would actually sound pretty fun to me. Stomping around in a big city, knocking over buildings, yeah, I'd do that. Does that make me a guy who just wants to go on a power trip, or does that make me evil? Maybe both. Probably both. Yeah, it's both. So that's my analysis of Power Rangers and how it can be adapted into 3 different mediums. How do you think it'd work? Have any of you tried adapting any elements of the show yourself? And if so, how did it go? Consider leaving a comment, liking the video and subscribing. Sharing it would also help the channel. My name is Freebowitz and thank you for watching. Bye bye!